A 9-year-old Canadian girl from Queensville, Ontario, was abducted, assaulted, and slain in October 1984. Her body was found in a wooded area of Sunderland, Ontario, on New Year's Eve of the same year. But it will only be more than 3 decades later that her perpetrator would be identified. In October 1984, Christine Jessop's father, Bob, was held custody in a detention center. On October 3rd, her mother, Janet, and elder brother, Kenny, decided to travel to the detention center to visit him. Janet thought that at 9 years old, Christine was too young to visit the detention center, so she had been left behind, on her own, at home. When Janet and Kenny got back home, Christine was nowhere to be found, and they declared her as missing. During the frantic search for the young girl, her face was on every television set and in every newspaper. Christine had plans to meet up with a friend that evening at a nearby park, but she never showed up. She was last seen buying a pack of gum at a local convenience store close to her home. 2 months later, on December 31st, her remains were found in Sunderland Brock Township, 34 miles east from her home. She had been fatally stabbed, and investigators discovered male DNA stains on her underwear. The following year, on February 14th, 1985, the police focused their attention to the family's next-door neighbor, Guy Paul Morin, after he was mentioned by Christine's mother. The police set up surveillance of the Morin home on February 19th, with 2 officers eventually interviewing him 3 days later, on February 22nd. 2 months later, on April 22nd, Morin was arrested. He was put on trial twice for first-degree slaying. The first trial began on January 7th, 1986, for which he was acquitted. However, on March 4th, the Attorney General of Ontario launched an appeal of Morin's acquittal. The Crown claimed that the trial judge had made a mistake in directing the jury about the meaning of reasonable doubt, and that the acquittal should thus be thrown out and Morin retried. The Court of Appeal agreed, and on June 5th, 1987, it ordered a new trial. Morin appealed this decision to the Supreme Court of Canada, who dismissed the appeal on November 17th, 1988. The second trial began on May 28th, 1990, and Morin was convicted 2 years later of first-degree slaying on July 30th, 1992. Immediately after Morin's conviction, a grassroots organization called Justice for Guy Paul Morin Committee was established to aid him in his search for exoneration. The committee's first objective was to help Morin to appeal his conviction and, in the meantime, to apply for his release on bail while he waited for the appeal to be decided. Morin was granted bail on February 9th, 1993. Following this decision, the committee reorganized itself as the Association in Defense of the Wrongly Convicted, now Innocence Canada. They have decided to broaden its mandate from defending Morin to working on behalf of all wrongly convicted Canadians. It was not until January 23rd, 1995, almost 10 years after he was first arrested, that Morin was exonerated because of DNA testing that had not previously been available. Christine's real perpetrator remained unidentified until October 9th, 2020, when his DNA was linked to the crime scene using genetic genealogy. The Toronto police named the perpetrator as Calvin Hoover, who was 28 at the time of Christine's demise. The interim police chief said Hoover did have a dated criminal record. He said it had no significance for the Christine investigation and that Hoover had not previously been identified as a suspect. Hoover's DNA was linked to the crime scene using genetic genealogy. Following an autopsy, a sample of his blood was on file at the Centre of Forensic Sciences laboratory in Toronto, which is what detectives used to conclusively match his DNA to the Christine Jessop crime scene. Hoover was apparently a friend of the Jessop family. In fact, the 9-year-old girl visited Hoover and his family at their home in the days prior to her going missing. Hoover even helped search for her when she disappeared. Hoover's wife was interviewed by York Regional Police the day following Christine's disappearance, while Calvin Hoover's name was mentioned more than once in the slaying case file, including when his wife told investigators that he was taking care of their kids the day of Christine's disappearance and had nothing to add to her statement. He was never actually questioned. Hoover took his own life in 2015. The police did not confirm the manner. They did, however, state that there was no foul play. Kristine's family was notified of the progress made in the case. Her father, Bob, said he felt sickened by the news. He said, "As I get older, you just start wondering when things are going to happen, or if it is going to happen. Fortunately, it has happened, but it is still a bit of a shock. Quite a bit of a shock, actually." Kenny Jessop, Kristine's brother, said the family is feeling stunned, but happily stunned after hearing the news. He said they are experiencing all 7 stages of grief. According to Kenny, Hoover was a friend of the family, and his wife was their father's co-worker. Kenny said in a statement, "They were our friends, and Kristine and I would go down and play with their kids." He added that he remembers Hoover's wife, but not Hoover himself. Kenny said, "Even 35 years later, you think about it every day. Was it this person? From day one, I truly believed it was someone who knew our family, knew my dad was in jail, and knew that we were going to visit him that day without Kristine." As for Morin, who was wrongfully convicted at the start of the case, the police went to his home personally to deliver the news. Morin said, "They said, 'We will be brief, but we just want to apologize to you about what happened to you over the years. We have found the person responsible for Kristine Jessop's slaying.' The police, however, would not tell him that the real perpetrator was someone that he knew. Morin said that he is happy for the Jessop family, that they have some sense of closure. He is relieved that his name can be definitively cleared. He said, "It is something I was always expecting. The justice system failed me, but science saved me." The police have also met with Hoover's family. They were shocked and surprised when they were told the news. In September 1980, a young woman who had just gotten married to the love of her life was brutally attacked in her home. Any future she had with her husband was stripped away in one of the most brutal ways. Her family only felt that justice was served after almost 4 decades. Kathleen O'Brien Doyle was described as a very outgoing people person. She was an aspiring writer and journalist. She was that type of girl that had never met with a stranger. On September 9th, 1980, 25-year-old Kathleen was in her Ocean View, Norfolk home on Granby Street in Virginia when an intruder broke into her house. Kathleen was alone at the house as her newlywed husband, a Navy pilot, was overseas doing Navy training. Everywhere in the house, there was evidence of a violent struggle. Furniture was overturned and belongings were scattered everywhere. This evidence showed that Kathleen had fought desperately to defend herself. She was brutally assaulted, stabbed multiple times, and was left there till she succumbed to her injuries. She was slain sometime between 7:30 p.m. and midnight on the 9th, but she was not discovered until September 11th, around noon, after an inquisitive neighbor called the police after noticing that something was amiss. The most disturbing feature of the crime scene was the odd evidence left behind by the perpetrator. Kathleen had a round, burnt mark on her cheek, and there was a charred Lincoln log in the garbage. It looked like the perpetrator used fire in the process of committing the crime. Kathleen's telephone's mouthpiece had been removed, making it impossible for her to be heard if she attempted to call for assistance. The case went cold and remained that way for nearly 40 years, until 2018, when the Norfolk Cold Case Unit and Detective Jonathan Smith learned about a new method, genetic genealogy, being used to solve cold cases. The department decided to give genetic genealogy a try since there was a DNA profile on the bedsheet from Kathleen's house. The genealogy company sent Detective Smith a list of 32 names about a year later, one of them being Dennis Lee Bowman. After Detective Smith investigated Bowman, he quickly learned that he could be the person responsible for Kathleen's slaying. He had prior violent offenses in his home state of Michigan. Detective Smith began searching Bowman's name on the internet and was alarmed by the results. In May 1980, Bowman had been a suspect in an attempted slaying and assault in Michigan just months before Kathleen's slaying. Detective Smith also learned that Bowman's adopted daughter, 14-year-old Andrea Bowman, had disappeared in 1989 under mysterious circumstances. Shortly after uncovering these red flags about Bowman, Detective Smith attended a cold case conference with other departments from across the country. He quickly found a detective sergeant from the Michigan State Police and inquired about Bowman. The detective said that he knew Bowman and his family. He also stated that Bowman probably was the guy responsible for the crime against Kathleen. A court transcript from September 1980 revealed that Bowman was in Norfolk on his 2-week military drill during the time of Kathleen's slaying. Bowman's DNA was a match for the sample collected from the assault kit and bedspread at the crime scene. He was then arrested in November 2019 at the age of 70. While he was in custody, he confessed to slaying Kathleen. He also confessed to accidentally ending the life of his adopted daughter. In a jail call recording, Bowman tells his wife that he buried their adopted daughter, Andrea, in their backyard. Dennis Lee Bowman is serving life at Sussex One State Prison, and justice was finally given to Kathleen's family. In 1993, what should have been a fun slumber party would turn into a nightmare. The perpetrator would finally be revealed after a lead from a witness. On October 1st, 1993, 12-year-old Pollyanna Klaas and 2 of her friends were having a slumber party at her home in Petaluma, California. At around 10:30 p.m., an intoxicated intruder entered her bedroom, carrying a knife. He then held the girls at knife point. He told the girls he was there to do no harm and was only there for money. Polly's mother was asleep in the next room while this happened. The intruder used electrical wire to bound her 2 friends, and they were gagged with a cloth. He pulled pillowcases over their heads and told them to count to 1,000. He then kidnapped Polly and fled. In a call to 911, Polly's mother, Eve Nickel, sounded confused. Eve is heard saying during the call, apparently a man just broke into our house and took my daughter. Over the next 2 months, about 4,000 people helped search for Polly. Actress Winona Ryder, who had been raised in Petaluma, offered a $200,000 reward for her safe return during the search, while the investigators' quick response helped to identify who took Polly. Their efforts did not lead them to the conclusion they were hoping for. On November 27, 1993, 2 months after Polly was abducted, Dana Jaffe was hiking with a friend on a mountain trail near her secluded home in Sonoma County. While on their hike, they discovered a man's sweatshirt, a pair of girls' red tights, and a piece of knotted white cloth. Dana said, "I thought this is maybe a crime scene." Larry Pelton, a former detective of the Petaluma Police Department, arrived at the scene and immediately thought the white cloth matched what was used to gag the girls at Polly's home 2 months prior. Further investigation proved he was right. Dana said that she recounted to the police a night back in October when she found a disheveled trespasser on her property. The encounter on file identified the trespasser as Richard Allen Davis. Davis's lengthy criminal history included a previous kidnapping for which he served time. His rap sheet had everything an offender would have on his record. He had only been out of prison for 6 months before he kidnapped Polly. Davis admitted to kidnapping and slaying Polly. He led investigators to where he left her body in a field in Cloverdale, a town roughly 50 miles from Petaluma. After the detectives recovered Polly's body and a long and tumultuous trial, Davis was convicted on June 18, 1996, of first-degree slaying with 4 special circumstances: robbery, burglary, kidnapping, and attempted lewd act on a child, which made him eligible for the end-of-life penalty. At his formal sentencing, Davis provoked national outrage by taunting his victim's family and extending both middle fingers at a courtroom camera. In his final statements to the court, Davis made a bizarre comment, saying, "I would also like to state for the record that the main reason I know that I did not attempt any lewd act that night was because of a statement the young girl made to me while walking her up the embankment. Just do not do me like my dad." This prompted Polly's father, Mark Klaas, to lunge at Davis, which then got Mark escorted out of the courtroom. Former FBI Special Agent Eddie Fryer said, "He made those statements to Mark just to be malicious and hurtful to a father who just lost his daughter." Judge Thomas Hastings then formally sentenced Davis to the end-of-life penalty. telling Davis that his conduct in the courtroom made the decision to pass this sentence significantly easier. Polly's father said, "It makes me so angry. It really does. I am still dealing with major anxieties 30 years later." Davis remains on the end-of-life sentence, as capital punishment was suspended by the governor of California in 2019, according to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. Polly's body was cremated and her ashes were spread over the Pacific Ocean by her friends and family. Mark Klaas has spent the last 30 years advocating for families who have missing children. In 1994, he founded Klaas Kids, now known as the Polly Klaas Foundation, an organization whose professional search and rescue team has assisted in finding missing people for more than 1,500 families. However, Mark recently announced that his organization will cease its efforts in 2024. He said, "We have been doing it for 30 years. I am 74, and I do not want to be doing this for the rest of my life." Mark said that he wants to take some time for himself and focus on the lasting memory of his daughter, Polly. Polly would have been 42 this year. The town of Petaluma has memorialized her through the Polly Klaas Community Theater. Mark said, "She wanted to pursue acting. That is what she wanted to do, and she was pretty good at it. She was really coming into her own as a human." A 32-year-old woman, Michele Whitaker, disappeared after being dropped off at a truck stop. After false evidence, the breakthrough finally came 6 years later in the form of a telephone call. Michele was one of 5 children and was very close to her entire family. Michele's mom, Laura Andrews, said that she was a very happy kid until they moved to Gastonia, North Carolina, when she was 15. When Michele became a teenager, she and her mother started to clash. Michele believed her mother was too strict, and that made Michele rebel. Michele considered joining the Navy, but she fell in love with her recruiter instead. He was about 6 to 8 years older than her. After graduating high school, she married this man, but their marriage did not even last 1 full year. According to Michele's mom, Laura, the marriage was awful, and Michele had to get out. After her divorce, the family moved to Spartanburg, South Carolina. By the time Michele was 30, she was struggling. She worked part-time as a waitress, but was barely getting by. One night after work, Michele was offered a ride home by a man she just met, named David. David assaulted and beat her, leaving her face badly bruised. David was then arrested, and he pleaded guilty to assault and battery, and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. No matter what Michele did, she felt as if she could not get her life together. She bounced around from her parents' home to friends' houses, and sometimes even slept in her car. Michele was arrested for drunk driving, for which she had to complete a jail sentence. She was mistakenly released from jail instead of attending court-ordered treatment for substance and alcohol abuse. On August 5th, 2002, Michele got into an argument with her mom. Laura was not sure where Michele went after that, but received a call a few days later from the man that Michele had been staying with. He said that he had not seen Michele in a few days. Laura was very worried and contacted the police, but they told her that Michele was an adult and there was not much they could do. Laura had a sergeant friend from the neighborhood who also knew of Michele's transient lifestyle. He told Laura that Michele would most likely turn up soon. No one in Michele's life had seen or heard from her for about 2 weeks. And on August 21st, 2002, an official missing persons report was filed. The police obtained Michele's bank records, but there was no activity on her account. The police spoke to Michele's ex-husband, but ruled him out immediately. They talked to her family, co-workers, and people she was known to have spent time with. The police did discover that a man named Brad Wines was the last known person to have seen Michele on August 16th, 2002. Brad and Michele met at a local pool hall where he said they hung out for a few hours and left to drive around on his motorcycle. Brad said that he dropped Michele off at a truck stop the next morning. He told the police that Michele was hoping to go to Myrtle Beach. He did not know where Michele went after he dropped her off. To make sure Brad was telling the truth, he took a polygraph test which he passed. Michele's family created a missing person flyer that they handed out at the truck stop, hoping someone would recognize her. However, no one had seen her. About a year into Michele's disappearance, the case went cold. Laura begged local TV stations to keep Michele's case alive in the news. In August 2005, about 3 years after Michele disappeared, the police received an anonymous letter. The author said that they knew where Michele's body was and had drawn a map. It said that Michele was near the water's edge, near tall pines, and at the edge of the pond. The location was only 25 miles from the truck stop where Michele was dropped off. The police spent 2 days searching the area, but they did not find anything. It was apparent that the letter was a hoax, and DNA confirmed that the letter had been written by a woman. The police eventually told Michele's family about the letter. They were disgusted that someone would create that and give them false hope. 2 months later, in October, another case made the headlines. A man named Jonathan Vick was arrested for the assault and slaying of Dana Satterfield, a beauty salon owner. Dana was brutally slain in her salon. The salon was located about 12 miles from where Michele was last seen, and suspicions fell on Jonathan because it was rumored that he had been a customer at the diner where Michele worked. Jonathan had a connection to Dana because his mom, Mary Ann Vick, had been one of her customers at the salon. Jonathan was also a suspect in the disappearance of his ex-girlfriend, Heather Sellers, who also worked as a waitress at a Waffle House at the time of her disappearance. There was never any hard proof that Jonathan had a connection to Michele. In November 2006, Jonathan Vick was convicted of kidnapping, criminal sexual conduct, and slaying. He was sentenced to life plus 60 years. He was never charged in connection to the disappearances of Michele or Heather. Michele's family held a vigil for her after 5 years of being missing. Laura also created a webpage with pictures of Michele throughout many years of her life. In August 2008, a woman called the police. Lieutenant William Gary answered the call. The woman on the other end said that Michele Whitaker was alive and living in Oregon. The woman had seen Michele's case on an episode of Forensic Files, as well as the webpage that Laura had created. She recognized Michele as the woman who was living with her friends. The woman wanted to prove that she was telling the truth, so she sent a photo of Michele to Lieutenant Gary. The Spartanburg police contacted the Oregon State Police. An officer went to the home where Michele was living, and Michele confirmed that she was indeed Michele Whitaker. Michele's fingerprints also confirmed she was the missing woman. Laura finally received the phone call she had been hoping for every day for the past 6 years. Her daughter, 38-year-old Michele Shelley Whitaker, has been found alive and well after disappearing. The police told Michele that her family had been searching for her for 6 long years. Michele said that she was tired of living the way she was living. After the fight she had with her mom, she drifted around and decided that her family would be better off without her. She originally wanted to go to Myrtle Beach and get a job, where she would be paid under the table. Michele met Brad on her last night in Spartanburg and convinced him to drop her off at the truck stop. She said she caught a ride and ended up in Las Vegas, California, and eventually Oregon. Michele claimed that she used her real name and did not know that her family was searching for her. She said she has a lot of guilt for what she did to her family and for having the police spend money and resources looking for her. Michele is closer than ever to her family, especially to Laura. In the peaceful suburb of Glen Ellen, Illinois, the summer of 1985 was overshadowed by the tragic disappearance of 15-year-old Kristina Wesselman. What began as a simple trip to the store for a candy bar ended in heartbreak when Kristina was found deceased. For nearly 30 years, her mother, Sandra, vowed to keep Kristina's memory alive while the case grew cold. Then, decades later, a routine DNA test would lead investigators to a man previously unknown. Kristina Wesselman was a 15-year-old student who attended Glenbard South High School in Glen Ellen, Illinois. The summer of 1985 was a time of excitement and promise for Kristina. But on July 21st, 1985, as she stepped out to buy a candy bar, her mother affectionately reminded her to be careful. Sadly, her mother's instinctual worry would tragically prove to be justified. When Kristina did not return home, worry quickly turned to panic. As night fell, Sandra and her family searched the neighborhood, calling out for her and asking neighbors if they had seen her. Their worst fears were confirmed the next morning when Kristina's lifeless body was discovered in a nearby field. She had been brutally assaulted and stabbed 8 times. The field where she was found was a place where children often played, making the crime even more unsettling for local residents. The investigation that followed was exhaustive and heart-wrenching. DuPage County detectives launched a comprehensive manhunt, poring over hundreds of leads in search of the person responsible. They interviewed numerous witnesses, canvassed the neighborhood, and brought in potential suspects for questioning. The detectives meticulously analyzed the crime scene, collecting physical evidence, including male DNA found on Kristina's body. At the time, DNA analysis was still in its infancy, but the investigators understood its potential for solving the case. In 2000, after advancements in DNA technology, the investigators submitted the genetic material to a national database, hoping for a match that could finally bring Kristina's family some measure of justice. Over the years, the detectives followed various leads, exploring connections to other crimes, but each lead ultimately fizzled out, leaving the case cold. The breakthrough in the decades-old case came on September 10, 2015, when authorities received a crucial tip that would change everything. A routine DNA test linked Michael R. Jones, a 62-year-old man living 150 miles south of the crime scene, to the genetic material found at the site of Kristina's crime scene. The DNA evidence had been collected from an assault kit during Kristina's autopsy in 1985 and entered into a national database years later. Jones's DNA was obtained after he pleaded guilty to aggravated domestic battery in July 2015, a felony that required him to submit a DNA sample. Armed with this evidence, DuPage County detectives secured a search warrant for Jones's home in Champaign, Illinois, where they uncovered further incriminating evidence. When questioned, Jones denied ever having been in Glen Ellen, insisting, "As God as my witness, I have never seen her before," even when presented with a photograph of Kristina. On October 4, 2015, Jones was arrested and charged with 2 counts related to the violent crime and 1 count of aggravated criminal assault. Kristina's mother, Sandra, who had dedicated herself to keeping her daughter's memory alive, expressed a mix of surprise and gratitude for the long-awaited development. Her son, Bill Wesselman, echoed this sentiment, noting the emotional weight lifted from their shoulders after decades of not knowing. On January 23, 2018, Jones was sentenced to 80 years in prison after pleading guilty. 15-year-old Danielle Jones suddenly disappeared in June 2001 in Essex, England. A beloved teenager's routine walk to the bus stop unraveled into one of the most haunting mysteries of the time. The search for Danielle's body stretched across months, and then the chilling evidence pointed to someone far too close to home. Danielle Sarah Jones was born on October 16, 1985, in East Tilbury, Essex. Growing up, Danielle was known for her bright smile and kind heart, qualities that endeared her to friends and family alike. However, in 2001, just as she was on the cusp of her teenage years, tragedy struck. On the morning of June 18, 2001, Danielle was last seen walking to a bus stop near her home, a routine outing. In the wake of her disappearance, a massive search operation unfolded, mobilizing Essex police to respond to one of the most challenging cases they had ever faced. Over 900 officers and support staff were deployed to scour more than 1,500 locations in a desperate bid to locate Danielle. The community of East Tilbury rallied behind her family, offering support and assistance, while volunteers joined the police in the search efforts. Flyers with Danielle's photograph was distributed widely, and vigils were held to raise awareness about her plight. As the investigation progressed, suspicion quickly fell on Stuart Campbell, Danielle's uncle. He was arrested just 5 days after her disappearance, on June 23rd. The authorities had initially delayed his arrest, grappling with a critical decision, whether to act on their suspicions or to continue the search for Danielle under the hope that she was still alive. The detectives weighed the potential risks to her safety against the possibility that Campbell could lead them to her. The media coverage of Danielle's case was extensive, capturing national attention and keeping her story in the public eye. The ongoing investigation revealed a troubling shift, as the police quickly became convinced that Danielle was deceased, even within the first 2 months of her disappearance. Almost 2 months later, on August 17th, the police rearrested Campbell on suspicion of slaying, fueled by significant evidence that suggested that Danielle was likely deceased. A police superintendent remarked to the BBC that Campbell had developed a relationship with Danielle that was certainly inappropriate and probably unlawful. The situation was dire, as it became clear that Danielle had attempted to distance herself from her uncle, but Campbell had resisted her efforts. By November 14, 2001, the Crown Prosecution Service assessed that there was enough evidence to charge Campbell with slaying, despite the unsettling reality that Danielle's body had yet to be found. The following year, on March 15, 2002, a body was discovered in a cement works located in an industrial area of Northfleet, Kent. Speculation arose that the remains could belong to Danielle. However, those hopes were dashed when the body was identified as Hannah Williams, a schoolgirl from Dartford, Kent. The case remained a haunting mystery, compelling the authorities to continue their investigation into Campbell and his involvement in Danielle's disappearance. On October 14, Campbell's trial commenced before Mr. Justice McKinnon and a jury, following an extended period of 11 months spent on remand. Witness testimonies revealed that Danielle had been seen conversing with a man in a blue Ford Transit van, which bore a striking resemblance to Campbell's vehicle, placing him in the vicinity at a critical time. Blood-stained stockings were found in the loft of Campbell's house, which contained DNA matching both him and Danielle. Additionally, lip gloss belonging to Danielle was discovered within Campbell's home, further implicating him in her disappearance. A diary maintained by Campbell revealed his unsettling obsession with teenage girls, complemented by testimonies suggesting he had manipulated young girls into posing for explicit photographs. This pattern of behavior painted a disturbing portrait of Campbell and his motives, raising questions about the extent of his influence over Danielle. Central to the prosecution's argument was a text message Campbell claimed Danielle had sent to him, in which she expressed gratitude and affection. However, the message's composition raised red flags. It was sent in uppercase letters, contrasting sharply with Danielle's typical use of lowercase in her communications. Mobile switching center records further dismantled Campbell's alibi, which stated he was at a DIY store half an hour away in Rayleigh. The records showed that both Campbell's and Danielle's mobile phones were connected to the same mobile phone mast around the time the alleged text message was sent, casting significant doubt on his claims. Forensic authorship analysis indicated that Campbell had likely written the message himself, using Danielle's phone in an attempt to fabricate a narrative that she was still alive. This revelation intensified the prosecution's case against Campbell, solidifying the belief that he was responsible for Danielle's tragic disappearance. On December 19, 2002, Stuart Campbell was found guilty of both charges, slaying and abduction. Mr. Justice McKinnon sentenced Campbell to life imprisonment for the slaying of Danielle Jones, a sentence that would run concurrently with a 10-year term for abduction. Following the verdict, the High Court mandated that Campbell serve a minimum of 20 years before being eligible for parole, effectively ensuring that he would remain incarcerated until at least November 2022 at the age of 64. This ruling was met with mixed emotions by the public and Danielle's family, who grappled with the reality that Campbell could one day be released. In January 2023, the parole board made a significant decision, denying Campbell's request for parole. This ruling provided a measure of relief to those who had followed the case. Though Danielle's body was never found, the evidence ensured Campbell's life sentence. A quiet, reclusive man, living under a false name, took his own life in a Cleveland, Ohio apartment in 2002. An investigation uncovered theories of his past that ranged from him being a fugitive on the run to a possible connection with notorious crimes. On July 30th, 2002, Joseph Newton Chandler III's body was discovered in his apartment, and the investigators believed he had taken his own life about a week earlier. He had shot himself in the mouth with a .38 caliber revolver, which he had purchased a few months prior. Him taking his own life appeared planned, as he had marked the days leading up to it on his calendar, closed the blinds, and turned off the air conditioning before pulling the trigger. A recent diagnosis of colon cancer may have played a role in his decision to end his life. At the time of his demise, Joseph had $82,000 in his bank account and had listed his co-workers as his emergency contacts. The truth about his stolen identity only came to light when authorities, trying to locate next of kin, discovered that the real Joseph Newton Chandler III had lost his life decades earlier. The real Joseph Newton Chandler III was born on March 11, 1937, in Buffalo, New York, to Joseph Newton Chandler Jr. and Billy Chandler. Joseph's life took a tragic turn when he was just 8 years old. On December 21, 1945, the family embarked on a trip to Weatherford, Texas to spend Christmas with family. They were traveling along a stretch of road 2 miles west of Sherman, Texas, when their lives were abruptly cut short. In a devastating accident, their vehicle collided head-on with a truck, shattering the family's holiday plans and forever altering their fate. The fatal crash claimed the lives of all 3 family members instantly. Joseph Newton Chandler Jr., his wife Billy Chandler, and their 8-year-old son Joseph Newton Chandler III were pronounced deceased at the scene. The accident involved a truck driven by L.C. Black of DeQueen, Arkansas. Remarkably, neither Black nor his passenger, G.R. Hutchinson, was injured in the crash. This revelation led to a deeper investigation into the unknown man's true identity. The authorities were initially unable to find fingerprints to aid in identifying him. In 2014, Peter J. Elliott, the U.S. Marshal for the Northern District of Ohio, reopened the case. DNA testing became crucial in unraveling the true identity. They eventually obtained a DNA sample after discovering that he had undergone colon cancer surgery at a hospital in Lake County, Ohio, in 2000. The tissue sample generated a CODIS profile, but initial searches yielded no matches. In 2016, forensic genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick joined the investigation, comparing his YSTR profile to public genetic databases. This effort revealed that the man's real surname was likely Nichols. By 2018, advanced DNA analysis through the DNA Doe Project utilized GED match, confirming that the man known as Joseph Chandler was Robert Ivan Nichols, an engineering draftsman from New Albany, Indiana. A final match through CODIS with Robert's son, Phil Nichols, solidified the identification. Robert Nichols was born on September 12, 1926, in New Albany, Indiana, to Silas and Alpha Nichols. He grew up as one of 4 boys and later joined the U.S. Navy during World War II. Robert served as a firefighter aboard the USS Erin Ward, which was bombed by the Japanese in May 1945 near Okinawa. He suffered serious shrapnel injuries to his back and hip, earning a Purple Heart for his bravery. After the war, Robert distanced himself from his military service, even burning his uniforms, signaling deep emotional scars from the war. In 1947, Robert married Laverne Court, and together they had 3 sons. For several years, Robert lived what seemed to be a typical post-war American life. He found stable employment as a draftsman at General Electric, providing for his family and settling into domestic life. But behind this facade of normalcy, Robert was restless. In 1964, without warning, he left his wife and children, filing for divorce that same year. He relocated to Dearborn, Michigan, telling his parents that he had found a job in the automobile industry. His decision to leave his family raised many questions, but Robert gave no clear explanation, leaving those closest to him puzzled by his abrupt departure. By March 1965, Robert had moved again, this time to Richmond, California. He wrote to his parents to update them on his new location, maintaining the image of a man starting fresh. Around the same time, he sent a letter to his son Phil from Napa, California, which would be his last known communication with his family. After that brief contact, Robert disappeared without a trace, leaving no further clues about his life or intentions. Later that year, his family reported him missing. Despite their efforts to track him down, including hiring private detectives to search in both California and Indiana, they found no leads. No one in Robert's new circles appeared to know anything about him, and the investigators came up empty-handed. Robert Nichols lived under his real name until around 1976, when he chose to adopt a false identity. In September 1978, he stole the identity of Joseph Newton Chandler III, the boy who had passed away in the car accident in 1945. Robert applied for a Social Security card in Joseph's name while in Rapid City, South Dakota. Over the years, he lived a quiet and solitary life, working as a draftsman and an electrical designer. Alongside his eccentricities, Robert had a talent for tinkering, making homemade electronic devices, and occasionally using his computer. After moving to Cleveland, he briefly worked for the Edco Company and later for Lubrizol, a chemical company in Wickliffe, Ohio, where he was described as a recluse who kept to himself and barely interacted with coworkers. By 1997, Robert's isolation deepened after he was laid off from his job at Lubrizol. His colleagues noted that he had no apparent friends, and he left his home only for work or meals. Robert's reclusive lifestyle carried on until July 30th, 2002. His story remains a strange and tragic mystery, with only fragments of his life uncovered after his demise. The enigmatic nature of his life after the identity theft suggested he may have committed serious crimes before assuming Joseph's name. One prominent theory proposed by internet sleuths linked Robert to the infamous Zodiac perpetrator, an unidentified serial perpetrator active in California during the 1960s and 1970s. This notion emerged from his resemblance to police sketches of the Zodiac and his previous residence in California, where the perpetrator operated. Another possibility was that Robert could have been Stephen Campbell, a fugitive engineer from Cheyenne, Wyoming, wanted for attempted slaying. Some speculated that he might have been a German soldier or Nazi official who fled to the United States to escape prosecution for war crimes committed during World War II. Investigators also explored a potential connection between Robert and the unsolved 1989 slaying of Amy Mihaljevic in Ohio. The resolution of the mystery surrounding Joseph Newton Chandler III reveals the tragic story of Robert Nichols, a man who lived under a stolen identity for decades. A 15-year-old high school student vanished without a trace from her small Utah town in May 1995. Her sudden disappearance from Spanish Fork High School, where she was last seen at lunch, led to a years-long investigation filled with conflicting testimonies, shifting alibis, and unanswered questions. The complex search for truth ensued, and then disturbing admissions emerged years later. Kiplyn Davis, born on July 1, 1979, was a vibrant young girl with a promising future, cherished by her family and friends. At just 15 years old, she was a sophomore at Spanish Fork High School in Spanish Fork, Utah, where she was known for her spirited personality and academic dedication. On the morning of May 2, 1995, after a disagreement with her parents, she arrived at school early, ready to attend her classes as usual. Throughout the morning, Kiplyn participated in her school activities, attending all her classes until lunchtime. She was last seen in the school cafeteria, surrounded by friends and classmates. Despite the normalcy of her day, Kiplyn's absence during the 4th and 5th periods raised immediate concerns. A close friend claimed to have spoken with her between these periods, but this statement later changed, adding a layer of confusion to the already puzzling situation. By the end of the school day, Kiplyn had not returned home, leaving behind her personal belongings, her purse, makeup, dental retainer, and school books, locked in her school locker. As the hours turned into a night of worry, Kiplyn's family grew increasingly concerned. She had told her friends she would not be attending planned activities that evening, and had even expressed thoughts about running away. These comments became a focal point for investigators, hinting at underlying issues that may have contributed to her disappearance. When Kiplyn failed to arrive home at her usual time, her family reported her missing, sparking a widespread search that would draw in law enforcement agencies. Within 2 months of her disappearance, the case had attracted the attention of the FBI, who began treating it as a possible kidnapping. The transition to federal involvement underscored the seriousness of the situation, as the investigators worked tirelessly to piece together Kiplyn's last known movements. Despite extensive efforts, including interviews with friends, classmates, and family members, the mystery surrounding her fate only deepened. As months passed without any sign of Kiplyn or clues regarding her whereabouts, law enforcement began to suspect foul play in her disappearance. Despite the argument she had with her parents on the day she vanished and her remarks about running away, Kiplyn's family remained firm in their belief that her life was taken. In the wake of her disappearance, numerous rumors circulated within the community, speculating about potential locations where her body might be hidden. Theories ranged widely, with claims that she could be buried in a nearby canyon, a train tunnel under a building, or even in various other sites around Spanish Fork. After 4 long years of searching and waiting, Kiplyn's family chose to honor her memory with a memorial service, acknowledging the profound impact her absence had on their lives. In a meaningful gesture, they erected a marker in her name at the Spanish Fork City Cemetery, creating a physical place for friends and family to visit, remember, and mourn. In 2003, U.S. Attorney Paul Warner took significant steps to revive the investigation into Kiplyn Davis's disappearance and potential demise. This renewed probe concentrated on several of Kiplyn's classmates, who were viewed as either suspects or individuals believed to have critical information regarding her fate. Among those scrutinized were Timmy Brent Olsen, Christopher Neil Jepson, Rucker Leifson, Gary Blackmore, and Scott Brunson. The focus on these individuals marked a pivotal shift in the investigation, aiming to uncover the truth behind Kiplyn's tragic story. Timmy Brent Olsen and Rucker Leifson were eventually charged with Kiplyn's slaying, as evidence and testimonies began to mount against them. Olsen quickly came under suspicion shortly after Kiplyn's disappearance. In a series of interviews with law enforcement, he provided dramatically different accounts of when he last saw Kiplyn, complicating the timeline of events leading up to her disappearance. His conflicting narratives raised red flags, leading investigators to delve deeper into his background and actions on the day she went missing. Witness testimonies played a crucial role in shaping the investigation, with several individuals claiming that Olsen had confessed to assaulting and ending the life of Kiplyn. According to these statements, he had allegedly hidden her body in a canyon near the Spanish Fork River. Such allegations painted a disturbing picture of Olsen's character and raised serious concerns about his involvement in Kiplyn's case. The accusations against him extended beyond this incident. During the investigation, at least 4 women testified that Olsen had exhibited aggressive behavior or committed offenses against them, suggesting a troubling pattern of misconduct. On May 6, 2009, a significant development occurred when Utah state prosecutors dropped the slaying charges against Christopher Neil Jepson, opting not to pursue the demise penalty. Instead, Jepson pled no contest to charges related to obstruction, ultimately signing an affidavit in which he stated that he had no knowledge of the circumstances surrounding Kiplyn's disappearance. Rucker Leifson, meanwhile, took a different path, pleading guilty to 1 count of lying to a grand jury. His sentence was set at 4 years in prison, adding to the growing list of individuals linked to the case who faced consequences for their actions during the investigation. Gary Blackmore and Scott Brunson also found themselves in legal trouble, having been found guilty of lying to a grand jury. Their sentences were contingent on their willingness to testify against Olsen. As the legal proceedings continued, a pivotal moment arrived on June 1st, 2009, when a judge announced a decision regarding a motion to dismiss the charge against Timmy Brent Olsen. The judge chose to defer any ruling on the motion, citing the need to review all evidence presented by the prosecutors. This indicated that the court still sought to establish whether there was sufficient evidence of Kiplyn's demise, and an evidentiary hearing may be called to explore this critical aspect further. On February 11, 2011, Olsen eventually pleaded guilty and received a 15-year prison sentence. In a troubling revelation, he claimed to have witnessed another individual strike Kiplyn in the head with a rock and admitted to assisting in moving her body afterwards. However, he declined to disclose the identity of this individual or the location of Kiplyn's remains. Despite being eligible for parole in 2021, Olsen's refusal to cooperate with authorities regarding the whereabouts of Kiplyn's body resulted in his parole being denied. Timmy Brent Olsen is currently scheduled to serve his entire sentence, with a release date set for February 2026. On October 22, 1989, Jacob Wetterling, his younger brother Trevor, and a friend, Erin Larson, was playing at the Wetterling residence in St. Joseph, Minnesota. Since they had no school the next day, they went to rent a movie at a nearby convention store. On their way, the worst thing possible happened. A masked man with a revolver stopped in front of them. He ordered them to throw their bikes in a ditch and lie face down on the ground. He proceeded to ask each boy's age. Jacob's brother was told to run toward a nearby wooded area and not look back, or else he would be shot. The man then demanded to view the faces of the two remaining boys. He picked Jacob and told the friend, Erin, to also run away and not look back. This was the last time 11-year-old Jacob was seen alive. The police launched an investigation and began looking for clues at the abduction site. They found tire tracks on a long driveway adjacent to the road, along with adult and child-sized footprints. With the community and parents on edge, the hunt for Jacob Wetterling quickly became one of the biggest search missions in Minnesota history. Shortly after Jacob's abduction, investigators in the Wetterling case learned of an incident that occurred over 9 months earlier. On January 13, 1989, 12-year-old Jared Shirel was kidnapped, assaulted, and physically threatened by an unknown adult man. What happened to Jared seemed very similar to what happened to Jacob. The man also had a gun and also told the boy to run and not look back. That incident occurred 10 miles from where the unknown man stopped the Wetterling brothers and their friend. Since Jared survived the attack, he was able to meet with the police and give them detailed descriptions of the suspect's car, clothing, and voice. A composite sketch of the suspect was drawn and released. The abductor was a man in his 40s or 50s, had a deep, raspy voice, and said he had a gun. But unfortunately, after a thorough investigation and the review of all available leads and evidence, no suspects were found, and that lead to the case went cold. 4 months after Jacob's abduction, his parents, Jerry and Patty Wetterling, formed the Jacob Wetterling Foundation, an advocacy group for children's safety. The Bridge of Hope, a crossing of the Mississippi River near St. Cloud, was named in Jacob's honor. In May 2014, investigators confirmed that they were taking another look at this case, as well as other child abuse cases. Finally, after almost 27 years, in October 2015, a man's DNA was linked to the abduction of 12-year-old Jared. His name was Danny James Heinrich. A statute of limitations has, however, expired, and he could not be arrested. He was, however, a person of interest in Jacob's disappearance back in 1989. Heinrich was interviewed and a DNA sample was taken, but he was not charged with the crime and was immediately released. A search warrant was granted and explicit child images was found in Heinrich's house in Annandale that led to his arrest on October 28, 2015. He agreed to confess to taking the life of Jacob and take the police to the spot where he buried him. In return, the police could not charge him with ending the life of Jacob. On September 1, 2016, Heinrich took the police to Jacob's burial site in Painesville. It is 30 miles from where he first picked up Jacob. He claimed that he got frightened when he heard a police siren and then shot Jacob twice and buried him. However, a year later, he moved his body after noticing that Jacob's jacket had become exposed. On September 3rd, the Wetterling family announced that the bones from the burial site were those of Jacob, and local law enforcement stated that the identity of the bones had been confirmed by dental records. Jacob's mother, Patty, said, "All I can confirm is that Jacob has been found and our hearts are broken. I am not responding to any media yet as I have no words." On September 6th, Heinrich made his confession that he took the life of Jacob, and he also admitted to kidnapping and assaulting Jared Shirel. He was then only charged for having the explicit child images in his possession. In January 2017, he was sentenced to 20 years in Federal Medical Center, Devens, a federal prison in Massachusetts. In sentencing Heinrich, Judge Thunheim said, "We will not pretend that this crime and sentence is about explicit child images. It is also about changing the lives of so many children and parents who prayed for Jacob's return and also feared you coming out of the dark. Every child knows the story of Jacob Wetterling. You stole the innocence of children in small towns, in the cities of Minnesota and beyond. Shocking information was discovered during the investigation. Both Heinrich and his brother were abused by a man then dating their mother. The man, Dwayne Hart, is a convicted offender since 1993. He was convicted of assaulting 4 boys in central Minnesota. Hart was also important to Jared Shirel's case. When, as an adult, Jared began investigating his own case, Hart's name came up. Jared wanted to talk to him behind bars, to hear his voice, in an effort to eliminate him as a possible suspect in his case. He said he was not allowed to talk with Hart, but now it is known that Hart was not the guilty party in Jared's case. Although Heinrich could be released in 17 years from the start of his prison sentence, Judge Thunheim told him that it was unlikely, as this crime is so heinous, so brutal and awful, that it is unlikely society will ever let you go free. Christy Mirack was born on November 3rd, 1967. She always had a dream of becoming a teacher. In 1992, when she was 25 years old, she lived in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and achieved her dream of becoming a teacher at Rohrerstown Elementary School. On December 20th of that same year, she was busy wrapping books for the children. Christy wanted every child to get their own gift. Unfortunately, she was never able to deliver the presents to the students. The next morning, on the 21st, her roommate left for work at 7 a.m., but Christy never made it to work that day. When the principal, Harry Goodman, heard that Christy had not showed up yet, he immediately got worried, as it was so unlike her. He tried calling her a few times, which she did not answer. He then decided to call her mother. Christy's mother gave the principal her address. He thought she just had a flat tire, and he got into his car to assist her. He arrived at her apartment, saw her car, and found her front door cracked open, which was strange. He called for her, but she did not respond. He then entered her apartment and found her lifeless body in the living room. She had been beaten, strangled, and assaulted. When Christy's family finally reached the principal again, a police officer answered the phone. Vince Mirack, Christy's brother, said, "We kept calling and calling and calling, and finally, when somebody answered her phone at her apartment, they acknowledged themselves as being someone from law enforcement and that there has been an accident, and she passed. The books that she wrapped up for the kids was all scattered over the floor. There was also a cutting board found in her room that she may have used to try and defend herself with." 2 neighbors in the housing community told the police that they were walking near Christy's home that morning and heard a high-pitched, unexpected scream from the home between 7:10 and 7:20 a.m. So, the crime took place within a roughly 45-minute window between when Christy's roommate left for work at 7 a.m. and when Christy usually left for work around 7:45 a.m. The investigators believed that the perpetrator had been watching Christy or was someone who knew her schedule. The day after her funeral, a man arrived at the school she worked at with flowers. He asked to see Christy. He said that he was a friend who just came to say hello. The school staff phoned the police since they found this very strange. This man ended up being Christy's secret boyfriend, and he was 20 years older than her. He was quickly cleared as a suspect. His DNA did not match the DNA that was found at the crime scene. The case unfortunately went cold. In 2007, 15 years after Christy's demise, her brother leased a billboard next to the highway in Lancaster, hoping to keep her case alive. He said, "It generated a lot of things, but there was nothing. Never anything that was concrete enough." In 2016, 2 decades after Christy's life was taken, Parabon Nanolabs became involved with this case. They used the DNA found at the crime scene to create a picture of how the suspect possibly looks. C.C. Moore also got involved, and together with Parabon Nanolabs, matched the DNA with family members of the perpetrator. She then started building out the family tree. She said, "I built back to great-grandparents of each of the second cousins, and then I started building forward. I flipped that tree upside down, do what I call reverse genealogy. I am building forward in time, trying to find the right person and the right place, with the right ancestral mix to be the subject." Moore narrowed her search down to a target family in Lancaster of Northern European descent. She also noticed that the suspect also had some Puerto Rican heritage. From there, she began searching for newspaper articles from the Lancaster area that might contain any information on any of these family members. Moore said, "I started digging into newspaper archives, and I finally came across an engagement announcement for a man who was the son of a woman from that target family, and he was carrying her maiden name. However, it listed his father, who had a Latin American name, and I thought, aha, now we are getting close." She added, "There was an online magazine that had an interview with him, and it talked about how he loved to cook Puerto Rican food because he was half Puerto Rican, and then I knew this was the guy." The police held a press conference to announce that they believe that they have found the man that they have been looking for. On June 25, 2018, Raymond Charles Rowe was arrested at his home. He was charged with 1 count of criminal slaying and was not eligible for parole. Investigators obtained DNA from Rowe, from chewing gum and a water bottle Rowe used while working as a DJ at an event at Smoketown Elementary School. Rowe was a DJ known as DJ Freeze. He is a father and often attended church. In January 2019, at his hearing, Patricia Spotts, Rowe's defense lawyer, said, "He has told us that he did it. The person standing beside me has admitted his guilt. He pleaded guilty in exchange for a sentence of life, without the possibility of parole, with a consecutive prison term of 60 to 120 years. When he entered his guilty plea, Rowe did not explain why he ended the life of Christy, and her friends and family may never know the truth about his motives. He turned and apologized to Christy's family, including her father, who was overwhelmed and kept his head bowed. Rowe told the Mirack family, "I cannot imagine what you are going through. I apologize." He is currently being held in the Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution at Waymart, but is trying to get a new trial. On August 26, 2021, he took the stand and claimed that he lied during his original guilty plea, and that he and Christy had a relationship. He said that they were intimate on the day of her slaying, but that someone else took her life. In April 2023, the Superior Court of Pennsylvania affirmed the denial of Rowe's motion to have additional evidence tested for touch DNA. April Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, in Fort Wayne, Indiana. She was really sweet and loving. On April 1, 1988, she asked her mother if she could go to a friend's house. April's mother, Janet, said, "Yes, of course. Just be back before 3:30 p.m. When it was 4 p.m. and April has not returned yet, her mother called the friend's mother. She told her that the two of them were playing in a playground. They left the playground at around 3 p.m. Nicole then wanted to go to another friend's house. On the way, April realized she forgot her umbrella at the friend's house, so then the two of them split up at the park. April never made it to the house to retrieve the umbrella. A few friends and family members tried to find April, but when they could not find her, they called the police. April was wearing a blue turtleneck sweater, a pink and red jacket, light blue pants with 3 hearts on the left leg, and purple shoes. 3 days after April had gone missing, a jogger found a body in a ditch just west of Spencerville, Indiana. The body was identified as belonging to April Tinsley. April's mother, Janet Tinsley, said, "Right now I am numb." April was fully clothed, but one of her shoes was missing. They did find her shoe about 800 feet or 250 meters away from where her body was found. The police think that the perpetrator saw the shoe still in his car and threw it out while he was driving. The next day, a motorist came forward, saying that they saw a suspicious blue pickup truck on that part of the road. Another witness came forward, saying he saw a little blonde girl that matched the description of April walking on that road, and she then got picked up by someone in a blue truck. The witness described the person in the blue pickup truck as a male in his 30s with sand-colored hair. An early suspect was a guy named Moose. He was a local gang member. People claimed that he would go up to children in the park and say inappropriate things. Moose passed a few polygraph tests, and there was no real evidence, so the police started looking to other people. 2 years after April disappeared, the police received a call from a man claiming that someone wrote a disturbing message on the side of his barn. The message read, "I take the life of 8-year-old April Marie Tinsley. Did you find her other shoe? Ha ha ha. I will end someone's life again." They noted a lot of errors in the message, and the police believed that the person who wrote it tried to look dumber than they really are. In 2004, a little girl about the same age as April was received a note. The note read, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped, assaulted, and took the life of April Tinsley. Here is a present for you. You are my next victim." There were 2 other messages received by 2 other girls as well. The other note read, "Hi honey, I've been watching you. I am the same person that kidnapped and assaulted and took the life of April Tinsley. You are my next victim. If you do not report this to police, and I do not see this in the paper, I will blow up your house." 3 of these notes were left on girls' bicycles, and another one was left in a mailbox. Another tip came in of someone accusing their own father of being the perpetrator. This man actually lived really close to where April did. He had a history of child assault and had a Polaroid camera that he used to take pictures of children. A few days after April's body was found, this man also painted his blue pickup truck a different color. In his home, the police found a notebook and matched the notes the unknown man sent to all the girls, and also the aforementioned Polaroid camera. When questioned by the police, the man claimed that he was working on the day April had disappeared. The police then checked his records at his work and found that he did not work that day or the day that April's body was found. However, as guilty as he looked, his DNA did not match any of the DNA found at the crime scene. Parabon Nanolabs then got involved in this case. They did some DNA testing and reported that the perpetrator was from English or German descent. The list of suspects was then narrowed down to 2 brothers. In July 2018, after a whole lot more testing, they were finally able to identify the man as 59-year-old John D. Miller. DNA from Miller's garbage matched DNA from the crime scene and from the taunts. And when police brought him in for questioning, he confessed. Miller said that he had planned to kidnap a child, but he had not seen April before abducting her. He said that he asked her to get into his car, and he took her to his trailer where he assaulted her and then took her life. At night, he took her body to a ditch. On December 21st, 2018, he was sentenced to 80 years in prison. Miller's earliest possible release date is scheduled for July 15th, 2058, when he would be 99 years old. April's mother had feared over the years that an arrest would never come. She said, "I cannot believe it is finally here." Mia Zapata was born on August 25th, 1965. She learned how to play the guitar and piano by age 9. In 1986, she and 3 of her friends formed a punk rock band called The Gits. It was active for 7 years until it released their final album in 1993. On July 7, 1993, at around 2 a.m., Mia left the Comet Tavern in the Capitol Hill area of Seattle, Washington. It was the last time she was ever seen alive again. She met her attacker after 2:15 a.m. and lost her life due to strangulation and was badly beaten up. Mia was not identified at first, as she had no identification on her when she was found near the intersection of 24th Avenue South and South Washington Street at around 3:30 a.m. She was then identified by the medical examiner as he was a fan of the band. The Seattle music community, including some of its most famous bands, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, and Soundgarden, helped raise $70,000 to hire a private investigator for 3 years. The funds dried up without any major breaks in the case. It took exactly 10 years for this case to be solved. In 2003, Florida fisherman Jesus Mezquia was arrested in connection with this case. DNA evidence was used to tie him to the case. A DNA profile was extracted from saliva found on Mia's body back in 1993. Original testing done in 2001 failed to generate a match, but Mezquia's DNA was entered into a national database after he was arrested in Florida for burglary and domestic abuse in 2002. He had a history of violence toward women, including domestic abuse, burglary, assault, and battery. Mezquia never testified in his own defense and still maintained his innocence. The theory is that he left the bar and followed Mia for a short distance before he attacked. Her headset covered her ears, so she would be unaware of any danger, until he grabbed her and dragged her to his car, where he assaulted her in the back seat. Mezquia was convicted in 2004 and initially sentenced to 37 years, which he appealed. He was then sentenced to 36 years, as he has been in prison since January 2003. Donna Zapata, Mia's mother, said, "I was beginning to feel pessimistic. I did not think anything would come of it. He is off the streets. He cannot do this to someone else." She added, "We all feel cheated that we did not get to know a 40-year-old Mia. She was totally interesting and funny. A person with no pretense." On January 21st, 2021, Mezquia passed away in a Washington hospital at the age of 66. Wendy von Huben was born on February 17, 1981, in Kankakee, Illinois. In 1995, she and her parents moved to Woodstock, Illinois. In December 1996, she began dating 19-year-old Jesse Howell. Jesse had recently moved into his own place. On February 22, 1997, Wendy told her parents that she was going to stay over at a friend's house. Her plan, however, was to run away with Jesse after he promised to take her around the world. When Wendy did not come home the next day, her parents reported her as missing. They soon learned that Wendy had not gone to school for the last week. Wendy and Jesse went on their journey with another couple. The four of them slept in a car each night. They ended up in Florida, where they parted ways with the other couple. It was also around this time when Wendy and Jesse ran out of money. The two of them started living under bridges and eventually made their way to a homeless shelter. From the homeless shelter, Wendy phoned her parents and asked for $200 for a bus ticket back home for her and Jesse. A few days later, Jesse called his parents from a nearby truck stop. He said that they were on their way home. They picked up the money sent to them by Wendy's parents. However, Jesse and Wendy never made it back home. On March 23rd, Jesse's body was discovered near the railroad tracks in Marion County, Florida. He was struck from behind. There was still money in his pocket, so the police believed that robbery was not the motive. After hearing the news, Wendy's parents and the police distributed thousands of missing persons flyers. A lead emerged from two homeless men from Jacksonville. They had seen a person resembling Wendy who was with a man named Bob. The police finally identified this Bob as Bobby Ray Taylor. They noted that he is not a suspect, but they did want to question him. A couple of weeks later, in June, Wendy's parents received a call. A woman on the other end called out, "It is me, Wendy," and then hung up. Later in the evening, they received another call from the woman claiming to be Wendy. She told her father that she was at a gas station. The call was so short that her father was not even sure that it really was Wendy. They followed up on the lead nevertheless. The police were able to track the payphone to a Phillips 66. They then viewed the surveillance footage and saw Wendy. In April 1998, the police found Bobby Ray Taylor, and they interviewed him and came to the conclusion that he had no involvement in the case. In July 2000, Angel Resendiz confessed to ending the lives of Wendy and Jesse. He is known as the railroad perpetrator, as most of his crimes were committed near railroads, where he had jumped off the trains which he was using to travel around. He is a suspect in as many as 23 slayings. He claimed that he struck Jesse and strangled Wendy 8 hours later. His motive for their slayings was his assumption of Wendy and Jesse being anti-Christians. Resendiz led the police to Wendy's remains only 15 miles from where Jesse was found. The police believes that the person who phoned Wendy's parents was just a prankster. On June 27, 2006, Resendiz was executed in the Huntsville unit in Huntsville, Texas, by lethal injection. In April 1981, the remains of a young woman were found in Spring Hill, Florida. The crime was immediately linked to a perpetrator, but it would take more than 4 decades for the woman to be identified due to the use of new DNA technology. During March and April of 1981, 4 bodies were uncovered from a sprawling junkyard on the property of Billy Mansfield Jr. in Spring Hill, Florida. It took weeks for excavators and deputies to find the 4 bodies, and then only 2 of the female victims were quickly identified. Mansfield was the eldest son of convicted child abuser William Mansfield Sr. Mansfield Jr. was in and out of prison starting in mid-1970s, including a stint in Michigan in 1977 for sexual misconduct. He was released after only a few months, after he testified against his cellmate. While out on parole in that case, he assaulted 2 teenagers and found himself back in jail. His other convictions included battery, kidnapping, and assault. After his release, he took up work at a mushroom farm in Santa Cruz, California, where he lived with his brother, Gary. There, he met married mother of 3, 29-year-old Renee Saling, at a tavern on December 6, 1980. The following day, passing motorists found Renee's partially clothed body in a drainage ditch in Watsonville, California. A post-mortem examination revealed that she was assaulted and strangled to her end. The Mansfield brothers were arrested days later, but only Billy was charged with first-degree slaying. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life after a mistrial and an attempted prison escape. Gary Mansfield was charged with accessory after the fact for Renee's slaying, but he turned state's witness and was relieved of the charge. Publicity from that case led an anonymous tipster to ask Hernando County officials to search Mansfield's home for Sandra Graham, a 21-year-old who went missing from Tampa on April 17, 1980. And then a year later, the excavation process started. Sandra Graham's remains were found there, as well as those of 15-year-old Elaine Ziegler, a tourist from Ohio who disappeared from a nearby campground on New Year's Eve in 1975. The women were assaulted by both Gary and Billy Mansfield along with their father, William Mansfield. Billy would then take their lives and dismember them. He then buried the women and teens in his yard because he wanted them close by. He never told the police who the Jane Does were. The unknown remains were sent to numerous labs over the years, but the investigators did not develop a DNA profile until 2020, almost 40 years later. The sample was sent to the University of North Texas, seeking a match in a national database without results. In 2022, they tried again using Parabon's Snapshot DNA phenotyping service, which creates a description of the victim rather than searching for a genetic match. The profile gave investigators an opportunity to generate their own leads, and a DNA sample from the victim's sister confirmed that the remains belonged to Theresa Caroline Fillingim. Theresa was reported missing in Tampa, Florida, by her sister on May 16, 1980. It was only a week before her 17th birthday. It is believed that she was abducted and slain that same day. Hernando cold case detective George Lloydgren said, "It is like a double-edged sword. It is sad in the sense that you are giving somebody the sad news that their loved one is deceased, but it is a positive and happy for me because I can know I am instrumental in bringing her home." Theresa's sister, Margaret Johns, said, "It gives me peace because I know I did not lose her, that she was taken. Now I can stop looking." Margaret said that she plans to cremate the remains and split the ashes with her brother. She also said, "The sad part of it is my whole family never knew what happened to her. My dad passed away without knowing. My mom passed away without knowing. My sister passed away without knowing." She added, 42 years is a long time. Life is short. It can be even shorter for some, and watch your back because there is a lot of bad people out there that will do a lot of bad things to people. In 1982, Mansfield did plead guilty to ending the lives of the 4 victims and received 4 additional life sentences and is serving at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton. In March 1993, Lisa Estepp lost her life during a shooting. A suspect was immediately identified, but despite the detectives' efforts to gather enough evidence to arrest him, it would only happen after a breakthrough 3 decades later. On March 16, 1993, police officers were called to a shooting in the 1400 block of 4.5 Alley in Huntington, West Virginia. The woman was taken to a hospital where she later passed away. She lost her life due to being beaten and shot in her torso. She was identified as Lisa Estepp, also known as Melissa Lisa Martinez. During the investigation, several witnesses were interviewed. The interviews did lead the investigators to a possible suspect. Due to insufficient evidence to charge him with the crime, the case unfortunately went cold. Finally, after almost 30 years, the perpetrator was identified as 59-year-old Ricky Louis Woody. Woody moved from Huntington to Billings, Montana, within a year of Lisa's end. In December of 2020, he was arrested in Montana on charges not related to this case. In May 2021, detectives with the Billings Police Department contacted the Huntington Police Department and indicated that they had taken a statement from Woody regarding a slaying that occurred in Huntington in the early 1990s. Woody claimed that he knew the person responsible for taking the life of a woman known to him as Lisa. Woody provided what details he could recall to the detectives and ultimately admitted that he had participated in the crime. After receiving this information, Huntington police detectives reviewed the case file from 1993 and interviewed Woody in September 2021 at the Yellowstone County Detention Facility in Montana. That interview, along with evidence from the original investigation, led to Woody being charged with slaying in October 2022, after he was the primary suspect in 1993. Woody was taken into custody at the Yellowstone County Detention Facility in Montana. He was being held on several felony charges, including being a fugitive from justice and assault with a weapon. His bond there was $50,000. Woody had several legal matters to go through in Montana before he could be extradited to West Virginia. On January 16, 2024, he pleaded guilty and has been sentenced to 10 years to life with mercy in the case. The sentence is to run concurrent to a sentence he is currently serving in Montana, which means that once the Montana sentence is complete, he will be placed into the custody of the West Virginia Department of Corrections to serve the rest of this sentence in the Mountain State. In March 1992, 2 people were found deceased in Waupaca, Wisconsin. The perpetrator would only be identified 30 years later. He would give his side of the story, of how he was linked to one of the victims, but what he had done shocked himself too. On March 21st, 1992, 23-year-old Tanna Togstad and her boyfriend, 35-year-old Timothy Mumbrue, were found stabbed to their end in their Royalton farmhouse in Waupaca, Wisconsin. According to the autopsy report, Tanna lost her life due to one stab wound to the chest, while Timothy was stabbed approximately 27 times. Tanna was assaulted too. The couple's pet dog was also stabbed and passed away. The detectives gathered all evidence and fingerprints on the scene. They interviewed the neighbors and followed up on all leads. But due to the lack of DNA technology, the DNA extracts found could not be matched to suspects, and the case went cold. 3 decades later, in 2022, the police identified Tony Hayes as a suspect, and a DNA sample was taken from him during a traffic stop on July 6th. The traffic stop was staged, and they obtained Hayes' DNA from a pen he used to sign a warning ticket. Test results showed him to be a major male contributor to the fluids recovered from Tanna's body. 53-year-old Hayes initially denied any involvement, but during questioning, he eventually admitted to the slayings. He disclosed to the investigators that his father had been slain in a snowmobile accident when he was 5 or 8 years old. The investigators then did their research and confirmed that Hayes' father had passed away on December 31st in 1977, when Hayes was only 7 years old. Hayes continued and described that his father was operating a snowmobile in a group of 3 that was racing. The second snowmobile hit his father's, and his father lost his life. The third snowmobile then ran over the driver of the second. He described it as a horrible accident. Hayes explained that on the evening of March 20th, 1992, he became very drunk as he went from one bar to another by himself. For some reason, he started to think about the accident that ended his father's life. Those thoughts led to him going to the home of Tanna Togstad. As one of the drivers was Tanna's father, Hayes could not articulate why he went there, but insisted it was not to hurt anyone. He described himself as being in a drunken stupor that night. He described getting into a scuffle with Timothy. He could not remember if he had brought a knife or if the knife was at the house. During the scuffle, he and Timothy were wrestling while standing up, and he moved his arm in a stabbing motion toward Timothy's chest. He described Timothy falling to the floor near the foot of the bed. Hayes remembered Tanna yelling, and that is when he punched her in the face. It is believed he would have knocked her out at this time. At some point, she started to stir, and that is when he stabbed her in the chest. When asked why he did not tell investigators right away, Hayes replied, "I did not want it to sound like I had it planned." Hayes told the investigators that he did not know why he did it. He told the investigators that when he saw the news report, he thought, "What did I do?" In August 2022, Hayes was then charged with 2 counts of first-degree slaying. Richard Togstad, Tanna's brother, had the following to say after the charges was filed. "It was one of the happiest days of my life. I knew his dad, I knew his grandpa, I knew his grandma my whole life. I knew the family my whole life, but I did not know Tony per se." It was upsetting for Richard to learn that for 3 decades, the Hayes and the Togstads continued life as neighbors in the same community. Hayes lived less than a mile away from Richard's house for about 15 years, and less than 3 miles away in the years since then. Until his arrest, Hayes worked at the Waupaca foundry. Richard said that while he is happy his family is finally receiving closure after a 30-year mystery, he feels mixed emotions for Hayes' family, who he believes were completely blindsided by the whole thing. He said, "Let's face it, it is a bad deal all the way around. Their family, our family." Just days after Hayes' arrest, Richard and Tanna's mother, Helen Hoffman, passed away at age 82. On Facebook, Richard wrote, "My mother passed away finally at peace." In July 2024, Hayes' request to reduce his $2 million cash bond to $5,000 was denied. Because Hayes has been unable to post the bond, defense attorney John Birdsall asked for the bond to be lowered. He wants the ability to meet with Hayes in person more easily. Also, because of some delays in getting evidence, the defense claims Hayes is being punished by being held in custody. Special prosecutor Nathaniel Adamson opposed the motion, noting the strength of the evidence in the case. 3 relatives of the victims spoke, opposing the bond reduction request, with 2 asking for the bond to be increased. Tony Hayes' trial will start on July 14th, 2025, for the 1992 slayings of Tanna Togstad and Timothy Mumbrue. A 6-week trial is scheduled. In August 1980, skeletal remains were found in Washington. New DNA technologies would only bring a breakthrough to the case 4 decades later. On August 3, 1980, a landowner in northern Snohomish County, Washington, discovered human skeletal remains while walking on his property. The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene along with a deputy coroner. The skeletal remains were photographed and collected that afternoon, including a skull which showed evidence of a gunshot wound. A secondary search the following afternoon yielded more remains. No clothing, jewelry, or any other items that could have been used to aid in the identification of the remains were found. The following day, an autopsy confirmed that the trauma noted on the skull was in fact a gunshot wound, and the case was classified as a slaying. The remains belonged to a white, possible mixed-race male, approximately 23 to 28 years of age, and 5 feet 5 inches to 5 feet 9 inches in height, with exceptional dental work. A dental exam was conducted of the skull and jawbone, including X-rays and dental charting, to be compared to known missing persons. A clay facial reconstruction was released to the public on November 21, 1980. The unknown man was then buried in the Arlington Municipal Cemetery on May 26, 1981. In the years that followed, the case grew cold. 28 years after the crime happened, in 2008, Detective Jim Scharf with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Cold Case Team and retired Snohomish County Superior Court Judge Ken Kausert began re-examining old, unsolved slayings cases in Snohomish County. With the emergence of new DNA technologies, the team was interested in exhuming this case with the hopes of obtaining DNA samples that were not taken during their initial exams. On August 8th, the Snohomish County Medical Examiner's Office entered the case into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System and the FBI's National Crime Information Center database. Despite the entries, the case remained unsolved. 3 years later, in 2011, permission was obtained from the Snohomish County Prosecuting Attorney's Office to exhume the remains to obtain a DNA sample for the purpose of identification. The exhumation occurred on July 20th, 2011, with representatives with the Sheriff's Office, the Medical Examiner's Office, and Dr. Catherine Taylor, the Washington State forensic anthropologist, in attendance. The remains were then transported to the Medical Examiner's Office for further examination, but unfortunately, they were unable to obtain a usable sample. In 2016, forensic artist Natalie Murray examined the skull and mandible and provided the Medical Examiner's Office with a facial reconstruction sketch, which was released to the media in the hopes of generating new leads. In 2021, Othram was able to obtain a DNA sample that was sufficient for testing after multiple rounds of extraction and human enrichment. On November 16, 2021, through their research, Othram's own genetic genealogists were able to provide the Medical Examiner's Office with the name of a possible match, Ronald David Chambers. U.S. Marine Ronald Chambers was reported missing in King County by his family in 1979. He was last seen by his family on December 17, 1978. He left their SeaTac motel in a rental car and was never seen again. Ronald's sister was contacted and provided a DNA sample for comparison. On December 29, 2021, the relationship was confirmed by Family Tree DNA, and the remains were officially identified as Ronald David Chambers. The suspect in this case, Robert Hellberg, passed away in prison on March 29, 1993, so there was no arrest made in this case. Foul play was suspected at the time, but without a body, it could not be proved that Hellberg was guilty of ending a life. He returned to the motel later that day, driving Ronald's rental car. Just before Ronald vanished, he and Mary, with their infant son, stayed at the motel to help his friend, Hellberg, move from Arizona. When Hellberg returned without Ronald, He told Mary he believed that Ronald's life was taken by a hitman. Snohomish detective Jim Scharf said that Helberg had illegal substance connections that were maybe at a higher level than street level. They said Helberg was a self-proclaimed hitman. Ronald's wife, Mary, said, "It has been a long time. He was 28, now he would be 71. I am really happy to have this moment and bring him home. Thank you very much to everyone for your persistence and dedication to seeing this through." Two friends attended a party in Tennessee in 2000 and then went missing. Or was that the case? An investigator who found a document and a YouTuber who found a vehicle brought the breakthrough 21 years later. 18-year-old Erin Foster and 17-year-old Jeremy Bechtel left Erin's home to attend a party in Sparta, Tennessee on April 3, 2000. Later that night, around 10 p.m., they were last seen together in her car, a black Pontiac Grand Am. Erin's father, Cecil Foster, said, "I called home on Monday night, and my wife told me Erin did not come home last night." Cecil told his wife not to worry about their daughter. Erin was 18 after all, and already talked about moving out. Then one night turned into another, and that was when panic sunk in. He said, "Just a nightmare, man. Just a total nightmare." No one saw them alive again, prompting rumors and speculation of their whereabouts, including false reports of sightings. Searches were undertaken locally, and also in Pensacola, Florida, during 2005 and 2006, following reports that Erin was living and working there. Erin was the perfectionist and Jeremy was the athlete, two White County High School best friends who cared about each other and their families. White County Sheriff Steve Page joined the case 11 years later in 2011. He said that he had gathered all the information he could at the office and asked the investigators from the past for their documents on this case. That is when he came across one piece of paper that changed everything. Investigators were fixated on the idea that a party on the west end of the county was somehow involved. Everyone assumed the two friends had left the party on their way home, but the document showed it was the other way around. Based on the report, the two were traveling from Erin's home and not the party. This meant detectives were focused on the wrong end of the county. On November 24, 2021, YouTuber Jeremy Bo Sides, who creates videos where he uses sonar technology and dives underwater to track down evidence in missing persons cases, shot a video showing his discovery of a 1998 Pontiac Grand Am that belonged to Erin. Sheriff Page said, "I told him I believed they went missing off of Highway 84. After Jeremy's discovery, the car was pulled from the Calf Killer River, and the human remains found in the vehicle was sent for testing. The remains have then been identified as belonging to Erin and Jeremy, and the teens have been laid to rest by their families." Jeremy Sides said in his video, "I am lost for words. I am so glad I could find them. I am so sad that that is where they ended up. I cannot believe it has been over 20 years that they have been sitting there waiting for someone to find them." The lead investigator for the White County Sheriff's Office said that they have ruled out foul play in the demises. The police have theorized that Erin lost control of her vehicle while driving on Highway 84, which did not have a guardrail along that section in 2000. In July 1981, human remains were found near Tavern Creek in Missouri. Ricky Ridings lost his life during a shooting. The breakthrough would only come after a recorded prison phone call and would lead to the victim's family thanking the perpetrator. On July 8, 1981, the Callaway County Sheriff's Office responded to a report of human remains found in a car parked alongside Little Tavern Creek, outside Portland, Missouri. A woman and her 3 granddaughters walked along Tavern Creek and then stumbled upon a blue pickup truck that smelled terribly. The remains, buried under a blanket, were identified as belonging to 27-year-old Ricky Ridings from St. Peter's, using his driver's license and old scars. A close-range shotgun blast, plus several days of decomposing in the summer heat, had obscured his features, the medical examiner concluded. He had been reported missing on June 30th, 1981. The Callaway County Sheriff's Office immediately started investigating this shooting case. The gruesome case dominated local headlines for days, but despite a vigorous investigative effort, it went unsolved. However, a breakthrough occurred 36 years later in 2017, when they received information from Conrad Schmidt III. Schmidt, who had been serving a life sentence since 1998 for an unrelated slaying, confessed to taking the life of Ricky during a recorded prison phone call. The following year, in 2018, Ricky's body was exhumed to reevaluate the evidence. The Ridings family was notified of the new developments in their case, and further witnesses were interviewed. On August 20th, 2023, the case reached its conclusion when Schmidt pleaded guilty to slaying. He was then sentenced to 10 more years in prison. As part of the plea deal, he provided specific details and answered the family's questions, granting them the closure they had long sought. He spoke to Ricky's sister and niece. Prosecuting attorney Ben Miller said, "This case presented a rare opportunity to offer the closure the Ridings family rightfully deserved. Closure in comprehending the circumstances surrounding Ricky's tragic fate." At the end of the sentencing, the Ridings family thanked Mr. Schmidt for his candor regarding his role in Ricky's end, demonstrating a remarkable and extremely unique instance of restorative justice.